Welcome to the Electric School Bus Campaign's YouTube channel. Today we'll be talking about the top 5 reasons why New York should pass legislation to ban the use of internal combustion engines in school buses, especially the dirty diesel school buses, and require the transition to zero emissions all electric school buses. I did not really organize these reasons in order of importance, but more in an order of flow. And the first thing I'd like to talk about is that New York needs to regain its leadership role in establishing environmental regulations, especially now that the federal government is rolling back a lot of its environmental regulations.
I don't think a lot of people understand the significant role that New York has played in the development of environmental regulations on the federal level. The Storm King Mountain litigation that came out of New York to help protect some fisheries challenged a governmental decision based on aesthetic issues and environmental impacts. It was the first case that established standing, which allowed people to sue on behalf of the environment and not just look at economic factors. It led to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Review Act, which requires that the government look at more than just the financial impacts, but also to take in the environmental impacts. Without this regulation, a lot of decisions that the government would take would go through that would have adverse effects on the environment. This was part of what held up the Keystone Pipeline from going through. However, in the end, that failed. They turned it around when President Trump took office and allowed the Keystone Pipeline to continue. And not 4 months into operation, it had a huge spill. And I mean, it just highlights that these pipelines are not safe. It's not what we need. We don't need to run more pipelines. They spill more oil each year
Than BP did.
in the Gulf a few years ago. It's more than oil tankers, and it's unseen because it's just continuous, and nobody really takes these into account. But these pipelines are not as safe and not as clean as we believe that they are, and it's just pushing more crude oil and diesel. It is allowing the transportation of oil and diesel, which is all part of the supply chain, which would be lowered if we move to electric vehicles. So another key environmental issue that came up through New York was the first citizen suit under the Clean Water Act. This was carried out by Kennedy's Riverkeepers Association. They were the first ones to sue a company for dumping the waste from a barge into the rivers. And this has done a lot to help protect the waterways all throughout the United States. Also, a lot of people are familiar with Love Canal, which created the Superfund regulation, which is allowed for a cleanup of massively contaminated sites. So I was saying New York has kind of fallen back, at least in people's minds, if not in actuality. Today, when one thinks of environmental regulation, especially in the vehicle space, California is what comes to mind. The California Air Resource Board has taken over, even from the EPA, on national regulations for vehicle emission standards. As goes California, goes the rest of the nation. CARB really is the one setting the standards now, and the EPA is looked at as second. And it's led to a lot of innovation in California. California has all of these compliance cars that are sold just in California. All these fuel cell vehicles that you're hearing about from Toyota and stuff, they're only being sold in California. When the Chevy Bolt first came out, it was sold in California, and now it's been moved across the United States and Mexico. But California really is the one setting the bar. And for electric school buses, New York should be setting the bar.
Okay, so the first reason is probably a little bit selfish. As an environmental attorney and one practicing in New York, I would like to see New York back on top of the game. But in any case, even if you did care, why school buses? Why should New York be the leader in school buses? Well, the fact is, New York is the number one market for school buses in the United States.
All right, so you might think, oh, he's giving away the secret. He said that New York is the number one market for school buses. But let's just look at the numbers and see how that plays out.
This chart gives you a quick look at the public transit system, and you see what a large impact school buses have at over 480,000 school buses. At the low end, we have 12,000 passenger rail cars, and then Airplanes only amount to 7,400, with motor coach buses like Greyhound equaling about 35,000. And then we have 96,000 regular transit buses. But I added in for a little perspective taxi cab drivers, which equal 233,000. But that's drivers, not exactly cars. There's probably, two-thirds of those are cars. And then just for a little bit more comparison, Lyft has 315,000 registered drivers, and Uber comes in at somewhere around 327,000 drivers. But still, they're no comparison to the number of school buses in operation on a daily basis. Now let's look at a state-by-state breakdown of how many school buses are used in each state. This is the top 10, but we've only ranked numbers 3 through 10 in this graph. And we can see Florida at number 10 with 15,000 school buses, going up to Illinois, which they've estimated at about 25,000 school buses. So the range is about 10,000 school buses. When we add Texas, the second largest consumer of school buses, you see an increase of over 15,000 school buses. That's more school buses than are used in Florida, which is the number 10 consumer of school buses. Finally, we get to the coup de grace, New York, which has 44,439 school buses as of 2012-2013 estimates, which is still another 3,000 more than Texas, and equals Alaska, Hawaii, and Wyoming combined. I think this chart shows the dominance that New York has in the school bus industry and the leadership role that it could take and what kind of impact it can have on the whole school bus industry. To equal the number of school buses sold in New York alone, it takes 18 other states from Alaska to Iowa to equal the number of school buses in New York alone. So the bottom 18 states 32 to 50 in ranking of need for school buses is required to equal just the need for school buses in New York State. As interesting and as fascinating as the numbers are of the vast quantities of school buses on the road, what's even more disturbing is the number of kids exposed to their emissions and pollutions every day, being stuck in these buses for 2 to 3 hours as they're developing. In New York alone, over 2.2 million kids are being exposed to these school buses every day, and in the top 5 states, over 1 million kids ride school buses to and from school every single day. And the pollution is more concentrated on the school buses, but these school buses add to the general air quality in all of these states, and it really is a problem that needs to be solved. Now that we understand that New York is a very large market for electric school buses and could actually move the needle nationwide, is it actually feasible for us to use electric school buses? I say the answer is yes, and the technology is actually here today.
In conversations with people, it just seems like they're not aware as to where the technology is on electric vehicles. The average person, I'm a huge Tesla fan and follower, and that community knows a lot. But the average people that I speak to who are not following electric vehicles closely do not know that electric vehicles are here today, that are functional and usable. We have a lot of companies that are pushing the tech. I know everybody, well, not everyone, but a lot of people know about the Tesla Semi reveal, which came out recently, which just has phenomenal figures. If they can release it by 2019, they're talking 500 miles with a full load, more than enough, more than capable for a school bus. But this is also being done today. While there's school bus manufacturers that are creating buses that give you at least 100 miles on a full charge. 100 miles might not sound like much, but think about the use of a school bus. They operate in the morning for about 2 or 3 hours. They pick up kids, drop them off at school. They're stored for the next 4 or 5 hours, and then they operate again for another 2 to 3 hours, dropping kids off. And then they go back to a yard where they sit overnight. And over the summer, they're not used much at all. And 100 miles is more than enough for most school bus routes, especially in New York City. The Office of Pupil Transport only requires that kids be bused within 5 miles of the school, though the range for a school bus is very low. I think 30 to 40 miles is the average. I have to do more research on that. I'll get that information to you. But as I said earlier, TransTech is right here in Warwick, New York, hour and a half out of New York City, and they are making electric school buses today. Some of those buses are being shipped to California. They have a huge contract. You can look on my website. I have some news articles on that. There is E-Lion out of Canada who's been making Class D, the large school buses, for a couple years now, and they're operating in Canada. Actually, I think they're Class C, not D. When you think of a school bus, these are the buses that you think of with a kind of snout nose and long, 50 plus passenger buses. They've been running them in Canada for a few years, and they're operating well, and they have over 100 miles of range. Adamanian Green Power has released the Synapse 72, which is another large bus. And then Daimler, with their subsidiary Thomas Built Buses, they've released the Julie, which is which came out this year. Also, Bluebird, which is one of the largest manufacturers, has 2 electric school buses. They have a Type A microbus called the G5, and their Type D All-American, which uses also diesel, propane, compressed natural gas, and they've fitted an electric motor to work with that. So these are established bus companies that have electric school buses available today. And some schools are currently running trial programs, but all of these that I've heard of mainly are California. I think there's one in Maryland going on right now. And surprisingly, I have this article on my website. The United Arab Emirates have teamed with Volvo out of China to create an electric school bus program. They're testing them for the desert heat, making sure that they have sufficient cooling. And I mean, think of a place that doesn't need to worry about diesel fuel or electric or gas fuel. I mean, the United Arab Emirates, and even they are moving to electric school buses. New York really needs to jump on this.
Reason number 4 is one that might be surprising to a lot of people, but right now, today, electric school buses are price competitive with other school buses, and they're also performance competitive as far as what is needed out of the average school bus. An investment today means better electric school buses tomorrow.
All right, so now we're going to look a little bit at the costs. I mean, it's going to be a little bit of sticker shock, but we really have to think of how school buses operate. Right now, the initial buy-in costs for electric school buses are very expensive, but this is new tech. The batteries are probably the most expensive part right now. I mean, we already have the supply chain for building the actual buses are already there. They're established. So right now, though, the key factors are the electric motors and the batteries. And the battery costs are going to come down as the buses are invested in and the technology is invested in. It's a supply and demand thing right now. They're just testing them out. Most of these buses are prototypes or built in limited quantities. But California ordered 3 school buses at the cost of $1.1 million, which $350,000 each, which is pretty expensive. I think a regular diesel school bus is probably half of that. And the United Arab Emirates, that deal that they penned was $6.5 million for unknown quantity of buses, but I think that's probably for most of the buses that they're going to be using, and also building up the infrastructure. But what we got to look at is how buses are actually used. In New York City, the law allows school buses to be in operation for 16 years. The initial cost can be amortized over a 16 plus year period. And if you think about electric school bus, it really probably has no limit because you don't have to worry about emissions and the emissions increasing over time. So you could probably just replace the battery pack, replace the motor, and keep that school bus on the road as long as it meets all the other safety requirements. It's not rusted out, and the things like the lights and the stop signs are working. So the lifespan of an electric school bus, I think, can easily be over 20 years without it being a hindrance. What's really going to make the difference is fuel costs. The cost for electricity is at least half of the cost for diesel fuel. New York requires that they use ultra low sulfur diesel, so that's going to be more expensive. And all of these after treatment technologies have to be kept up and maintained. We have things like the closed crankshaft ventilation system, which stops the gases from the engine compartment from getting into the bus. And then we have catalytic converters, and now they have the SCR, which is the selective catalytic reduction system, which uses ammonia and it sprays it onto the exhaust, and there's a chemical reaction that happens in the catalyst that cleans a lot of the NOx and carbon dioxide and particulate matter out of the diesel fuel. But you have to repurchase this ammonia. This is going to be an ongoing cost. 1 gallon of the ammonia to every 5 gallons of diesel fuel. So this is going to cost money over time, and if maintenance costs go up, people might stop buying this, so that the catalytic converter is not going to be as protective.
This is what it looks like when the diesel emissions reduction technology is not being taken care of and properly maintained. You can see the pollutants just pouring out of the back of this bus.
They have to do regular maintenance like oil filters, air filters. You're not going to need any kind of oil changes for an electric motor. Their transmission, this is going to be maintained. Transmissions can break. Electric school buses have a single gear in most cases. The transmission will not be an issue. You won't have to do all of that maintenance. There's also brakes will last longer. Electric vehicles use the motor to actually stop the truck for the most part, and also generate electricity. So the brakes may last 2 to 3 times longer than on a regular school bus. Then once you factor in the health costs, particulate matter is known to aggravate asthma and create lung deficiencies as children are growing. And it also, there is the NOx emissions, which is a greenhouse gas emissions, and carbon dioxide also from diesel fuel. These are all going to be reduced. You're going to have less incidence of asthma. University of Michigan study showed that the transition from the regular diesel mix to a mix of ultra low sulfur diesel showed that kids missed less days of school. They had less irritation in their lungs, eyes. So if we completely eliminate diesel, this is going to be even better. And once you add in the health cost to also the cost of lower maintenance and fuel for these buses, over the 20 to 15 years that these buses will operate, there's no debate whether or not the electric school bus is going to be the better economic choice in the long run.
Reason number 5, it's not the last reason, it's probably the first reason and the best reason to do it. It's the right thing to do. If you look at it from a purely financial aspect over the long term of a bus, it is the better thing to do financially, and from a health and human safety interest, it is also the best thing to do. We need to do this for our kids and for future generations. We need to start the transition right now.
I mean, we are already all paying for it with our taxes. A lot of people complain, one of their main complaints is that we're funding all these private companies. Tesla is getting handouts from the government to build cars for rich people. So why not take that money and put it towards school buses, which is something that everyone benefits from, everyone uses, and everyone is already paying for it. Our taxes are going to schools. They're going to fund schools. So why are we putting this money to fund dirty diesel buses that are harming our kids, harming our environment, harming us, lowering our lifespans? It just doesn't make any sense when you think about it, why the money is not being spent to transition to electric school buses and making this an aggressive shift. And there's already federal funding out there for transitioning diesel to electric or cleaner fuels, but now is the time that we just need to go to electric, forget about propane, forget about compressed natural gas. These all reduce emissions, but they do not eliminate emissions. Electric school buses are the only way that we're going to get 0 point source emissions from these buses. There's a federal program, DERA, the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, which pays up to 60% of the engine replacement for electric and 30% of the cost to electrify places to provide power. So schools can put in these plugs to charge the electric school buses. The private companies can put in these chargers and get paid. And these chargers can be used for the public. If you put it at a schoolyard somewhere that is accessible by the public. This will help to build the infrastructure. Also, the U.S. Department of Energy gave millions of dollars in grants to Bloomberg and Cummings to develop electric propulsion systems to replace diesel. So this money's already been spent on research. Let's use it. Let's put it into action. This is why these guys have come out with these electric propulsion systems for these heavy duty and light duty trucks. And there's state funding. California has the rural school bus pilot program, which has paid that $1.1 million that I said for those 4 school buses for one community. And they have another 13 or so school buses that they're paying for. And even here in New York, there's a $60,000 voucher towards getting electric school buses. This is really going to reduce the cost of purchasing these buses, but this is going to expire June 30th of 2018. We've got to talk to our legislators up in Albany and make sure that they extend this program and make sure that this money is actually being used. These schools need to take advantage of this money, and these private companies in New York need to take advantage. New York City school buses are not owned by the DOE, they're private contractors, and we need to require them to get electric school buses. There's also the VW settlement. I know some of you have probably heard about VW, and I mean, we're talking about the world's largest car manufacturer. They've been pushing diesel for many years. They have billions of dollars invested in diesel technology, and they could not meet the emission standards that the EPA had set for passenger vehicles. And the emission standards for heavy duty and light duty trucks are less stringent. So if VW could not meet the emission standards, what levels are these buses actually putting out? It's just scary to think about it. When I started researching the school bus issue, the more I learned, the more important it has become to me that this be done and done quickly. But the VW is offering, they have to pay $14.7 billion. That's with a B, the big B, $14.7 billion, with $10 billion of that going towards vehicle buyback and modification programs, which is, most of that is probably going towards buying back their cars from the people that they sold them to and modifying some vehicles. But where the money really comes into play is $2 billion is going to fund zero emission investment programs. $800 million of that is going to California, and the other 49 states can fight over the other $1.2 billion. And New York needs to get in there and get their fair share of that. But that's not all the money. There's another $2.7 billion left over for Environmental Mitigation Trust to reduce NOx emissions. And NOx is one of the main things that comes out of diesel emissions from school buses and other sources. And New York's share of that is $117,408,744. And California is getting 3 times that. I don't know, but anyway, New York has over $117 million coming to it, guaranteed to go towards reducing NOx. And we need to put that towards beefing up the electric school bus technology and getting those school buses on New York City streets. The government, for government-owned or contracted school buses, they will pay 100% of the cost. 100%. No cost to the schools. Free. They just go order these buses, get the grant money, and it costs nothing. Nothing. And to replace a 2006 or older bus, and also new buses, and also for infrastructure. They're also paying to get the chargers in place. I mean, this is a gold mine. This has to be used. And for private companies, they will pay up to 75% of the cost. So we're talking initial investment in these electric school buses will be less or nothing. So there's no comparison now. We talked about amortizing the cost of these electric school buses over the 15 years. Well, now there's no initial costs. No initial costs for the school buses, plus the savings in health care and the savings in ongoing maintenance. There's no debate. The debate is over at this point. And then, I mean, how are we really paying for this? How are we paying for all of this climate change? It's with our health, the health of ourselves, our kids, our grandkids. I mean, they're the ones that are really going to pay. Our kids' lungs are developing as we're exposing them to these harmful pollutants. They breathe twice as fast as an adult because of their lung capacity. I mean, I wish I had some pictures of lungs of kids that die early of asthma and um, complications. Their lungs are black, look like they were coal miners. It's just disgusting that in this day and age, when we know better, that we still haven't done much. I mean, diesel emissions and the impact from school buses has been known 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We've known that these emissions are harmful. Many of the chemicals that come out of diesel emissions are on the carcinogen lists. It is surprising. I mean, we did something early on. We went for the idling regulations and best available technology. This was passed in New York in 2005, and since then we've done nothing. But the world has progressed, and we need to progress. Now is the time. I would like the next generation of kids going to school to think of riding on a diesel school bus like my kids think of a VHS cassette or a tape recorder. I mean, these are obsolete technologies. They they need to be eliminated. We don't need to keep pushing them for the next 10 or 15 years. We need to start the transition now so that in 10 or 15 years, these things are off the streets. No one's going to replace all the school buses tomorrow, but if we don't start today, these school buses could be in operation for another 30 years. If we do another cycle of diesel and propane, these buses are going to run for 15, 16, 20 years on the streets. So the transition time is a long time, and that's why we need to start now. It, it just has to be done. So please join the electric school bus campaign. Help me out. Get the word out. Spread the word. Those were my top 5 reasons for why New York and every state, the whole nation, the whole world needs to transition to electric school buses. Let's get this job done.
Thanks for watching the Electric School Bus Campaign's YouTube channel. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, please hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. To get notifications of our latest videos, hit the bell in the upper right hand corner. If you found the videos informative and entertaining and would like to help the channel to grow, don't forget to click that like button. But the best way to help us grow is to share these videos on your favorite social media site. You should also visit our website, electricschoolbuscampaign.org, for more information, or follow us on our social media websites, Twitter, Facebook, Google+, and Instagram. You'll find the links below in the comments section, or search Electric School Bus Campaign. To learn more about what's going on with the Electric School Bus Campaign or in the electric school bus world, choose one of our videos below. I hope you enjoy. Thanks again for watching, and continue to spread the word.